Commander Xylak's three hearts hammered against his chitinous chest as he watched the sensor readings from his command post. The Vorthon invasion force had broken through their outer defenses on Kepler 442b, and his remaining troops were falling back to the final defensive line around New Geneva Colony. The mining settlement housed over 2 million civilians, mostly families of the workers who had been extracting rare minerals from this harsh world for the past decade. The planet itself was already a nightmare. Kepler 442b sat in the habitable zone of its star, but barely. Gravity pulled at nearly twice galactic standard. The atmosphere carried toxic spores during certain seasons, and the native wildlife included creatures that could tear through standard military armor like tissue paper. Most species in the Galactic Federation considered it barely suitable for automated mining operations, let alone permanent settlement. But humans had called it home anyway. Xylak had served alongside human troops before and found them surprisingly competent despite their fragile appearance. They adapted quickly, followed orders well, and showed remarkable courage under fire. When he had been assigned to defend this human colony, he had expected a straightforward defensive operation. The Vorthons were raiders, not a serious military threat. His mixed battalion of Federation forces should have been more than adequate. He had been wrong. The Vorthons had arrived with 3 times the expected force strength, equipped with weapons and ships that suggested backing from someone with much deeper pockets. Worse, they seemed to know exactly where to hit the defenses for maximum effect. This was no random raid. This was a calculated military operation designed to seize the planet's mining infrastructure intact. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Federation Command," reported Lieutenant Kess, her 6 arms dancing across the communication console with practiced efficiency. "Put it through," Xylak ordered, hoping against hope for news of reinforcements. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the stern features of Admiral Vex, the Thraxian who commanded this sector. His reptilian features were unusually grim, even for a Thraxian. "Commander Xylak, I've received your situation reports. I'm afraid the nearest Federation fleet is engaged in operations 3 systems away and cannot be diverted. However, we have managed to arrange for emergency reinforcements from an allied force in the region." Xylak felt his spirits lift slightly. Any help was better than none. "What kind of forces, Admiral? And when can we expect them?" "They should be arriving within 6 standard hours. As for the type..." Admiral Vex paused, his scaled features showing something that might have been concern. "The reinforcements are coming from Earth. A single battalion." A single battalion. Xylak's hearts sank. He had hoped for at least a full regiment, preferably with heavy weapons and air support. 1 battalion of human troops, no matter how well trained, would barely make a dent in the Vorthon force currently advancing on his position. "Sir, with respect, my current force is already outnumbered 4 to 1. A single additional battalion won't significantly change our tactical situation." Admiral Vex was quiet for a long moment. "Commander, you've served alongside humans before, but always as part of mixed Federation units. These reinforcements are different. They're coming from the Sol Defense Force, and they specifically requested to be sent to Kepler 442b when they heard about the situation." "They requested it?" Xylak was confused. Most species avoided deployment to worlds they weren't adapted for. "Why would they specifically want to come to this planet?" "Because," the Admiral said slowly, "according to their classification system, Kepler 442b isn't just another colony world. In human terms, it's what they call a death world, and apparently that makes it home." The transmission ended, leaving Xylak staring at the empty holographic display. He had heard the term Deathworld before, usually in the context of worlds too dangerous for colonization. The fact that humans had not only colonized this planet but thrived on it was already impressive. But what did it mean that they considered it home? His contemplation was interrupted by another urgent report from his sensor operator. Sir, the Vorthans have broken through checkpoint Charlie. They'll reach the main colony perimeter within 4 hours. Xylac turned his attention back to the tactical display. 4 hours to prepare for what would likely be their final stand. He began issuing orders to his remaining companies, directing them to fall back to prepared positions around the colony. His troops were good soldiers, but they were tired, outnumbered, and fighting on a world that was actively hostile to most of them. The gravity alone was wearing down his troops. Species adapted to lower gravity worlds were struggling with the constant strain, and their combat effectiveness was declining with each hour. The humans serving in his mixed units seemed unaffected, but there were only a few dozen of them scattered throughout his force. As his forces prepared their defensive positions, Xylac found himself studying the geological and biological reports about Kepler 442b. The planet was indeed a harsh environment by galactic standards. The gravity was crushing by most species' standards. The atmospheric composition required filter masks for many species. The native flora included several varieties of plants that could kill with casual contact. The fauna was even worse. The largest predators on the planet were called storm bears by the human colonists. They stood over 3 meters tall, possessed claws that could shred titanium steel alloy, and had a documented running speed that exceeded that of most military vehicles. They hunted in packs and showed problem-solving intelligence that suggested near-sapient cognition. There were also the razor birds, flying predators with metallic feathers sharp enough to cut through ceramic armor. They nested in large flocks and had been known to bring down aircraft with coordinated attacks. The ocean contained depth krakens that made spaceship-sized meals out of anything that ventured too far from shore. And yet, the human colonists not only survived here, but seemed to actually enjoy the challenge. Their children played in environments that would kill most galactic species within minutes. Their civilians worked jobs that would require full hazmat gear for other species. They had turned this world into a thriving colony with a growing population and an economy that supplied rare minerals to dozens of systems. Perhaps more remarkably, they had done it all while maintaining the local ecosystem. The humans had learned to work with the planet rather than against it. They had trained some of the storm bears as working animals. They had developed symbiotic relationships with several species of the local flora. They had turned the planet's challenges into advantages. A new alarm sounded from his communication station. "Sir, we're receiving an incoming transmission. It's from the approaching human reinforcements." "Put it through," Xylac ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was distinctly human, with the flat accent typical of Sol system natives. "Federation Command, this is Colonel Sarah Chen of the 75th Earth Defense Battalion. We're beginning our approach to Kepler 442b. Request permission to land at coordinates that we'll transmit separately." "Colonel Chen, this is Commander Xylac. I'm the Federation Force Commander on the surface. We have prepared landing zones at the spaceport that should accommodate your transports." There was a pause before the human responded. "Negative, Commander. We won't be using the spaceport. We're conducting a combat drop directly into the operational area. Please ensure your forces are clear of the coordinates we're transmitting." Xylac looked at the coordinates as they appeared on his display. The humans wanted to land directly between his defensive positions and the advancing Vorthon force. It was either tactically brilliant or completely suicidal. "Colonel, those coordinates place you directly in the path of the Vorthon advance. You'll be outnumbered and cut off from our defensive positions." "Understood, Commander. That's exactly where we want to be." Before Xylac could respond, his sensor operator called out excitedly. "Sir, I'm detecting the human fleet. They're coming in fast and low, using the planet's magnetic field to mask their approach." Xylac looked at the tactical display and felt his 3 hearts skip several beats. The approaching signatures were unlike anything he had ever seen. The ships were coming in at speeds that should have torn them apart in the planet's atmosphere. They were flying in formation through a magnetic storm that was interfering with both his sensors and the Vorthan's sensors, and they were heading directly for the most dangerous part of the planet's surface. "Colonel Chen," he transmitted, "are you aware that your intended landing zone is in the middle of Storm Bear territory, and there's an active electrical storm moving through that region?" The human's response was immediate and carried what sounded almost like amusement. "Yes, Commander. We're counting on both of those factors. See you on the ground." The transmission cut off, leaving Xylac staring at his tactical display in bewilderment. The humans were deliberately landing in the most dangerous possible location, surrounded by hostile wildlife, in the middle of a storm, directly in the path of an overwhelming enemy force. And they sounded happy about it. His contemplation was interrupted by his sensor operator's excited voice. "Sir, the human ships are beginning their landing sequence, and Commander, you need to see this." The main display switched to a visual feed from one of their reconnaissance drones. Xylac watched in amazement as the human ships dove through the storm like predatory birds. Lightning struck several of them, but they continued their descent without apparent damage. The ships themselves were unlike any Federation design he had ever seen. They were sleek, predatory, and looked like they had been built specifically for combat operations in hostile environments. As the ships disappeared into the storm, Xylac realized that his understanding of humans might have been fundamentally incomplete. He had served alongside them as part of Federation forces, where they operated under Federation protocols and used Federation equipment. But these troops were coming from Earth itself, equipped and trained according to human standards. For the first time since the Vorthans had arrived in overwhelming numbers, Xylac felt something he hadn't dared to feel before: hope. The storm was intensifying as the last of the human ships disappeared from view. In a few hours, he would learn exactly what it meant when humans called a place like Kepler 442b home. And more importantly, he would discover what kind of soldiers were forged in the fires of a world that could kill with a single mistake. The Vorthans had asked for a fight. They were about to get more than they had bargained for. The first sign that something had changed came from the Vorthan advance units themselves. General Krath was monitoring the communications from his flagship in orbit when his forward commanders began reporting strange signals from the landing zone where the human reinforcements had disappeared into the storm. "General," reported his communications officer, "forward units are requesting clarification on the seismic readings from Grid Section 77 Alpha." Krath looked at the sensor displays with growing confusion. The readings showed what appeared to be controlled explosions, but the pattern made no sense. The detonations were moving in coordinated waves across the landscape, but there was no apparent tactical purpose to their placement. "Are the humans mining the area?" he wondered aloud. His tactical officer, a scarred veteran of dozens of raids, studied the patterns more carefully. "Sir, I don't think those are mining operations. The explosions are following the Storm Bear migration routes." Before Krath could ask for clarification, his communications array lit up with urgent transmissions from his ground forces. "Command, this is Advance Unit 12. We have eyes on the storm that the humans landed in. Sir, you need to see this." The main display activated, showing a real-time feed from one of their reconnaissance drones. The electrical storm was still raging across the landing zone, but now there were additional lights moving through the darkness. Bright flashes that weren't lightning, moving in precise formations across the landscape. "What are we looking at?" Krath demanded. "Sir, we think the humans are fighting something in there, but we can't get clear readings through the storm interference." The answer came 20 minutes later when the storm began to dissipate. As the electrical interference cleared, the Vorthan sensors finally got a clear picture of the landing zone. The landscape had been completely transformed. Where before there had been dense forest and rocky outcroppings, now there were perfectly prepared defensive positions carved into the terrain itself. Trees had been felled and arranged into interlocking barriers. Rock formations had been reshaped into firing positions. Natural caves had been expanded into supply depots, but most disturbing of all were the creatures. The storm bears that should have been attacking any invaders in their territory were instead moving in coordinated formations alongside the human soldiers. The massive predators had been fitted with armor and were carrying human equipment. They moved with the discipline of trained military units. "Sir," his tactical officer reported in a voice filled with disbelief, "it appears the humans have somehow recruited the local wildlife as allies." Before Krath could process this information, new reports began flooding in from his advance units. "General, we have contact with human forces. They're not retreating to defensive positions." "Sir, they're advancing directly toward our positions." The tactical display updated to show the human force movements, instead of the cautious defensive posture that any rational military force would adopt when outnumbered 4-1. The humans were spreading out across the landscape in small, highly mobile units. They were using the terrain features with an expertise that suggested intimate knowledge of the environment. "How many humans did their reinforcements bring?" Krath asked. "Approximately 1,000 soldiers, sir. A single battalion." Krath stared at the display in confusion. 1,000 soldiers, no matter how well trained, could not possibly pose a significant threat to his force of 4,000. Yet something about their movement patterns suggested they weren't behaving like a force that knew it was outnumbered. His contemplation was interrupted by an urgent transmission from his lead ground units. "Command, we have a problem. The humans aren't just fighting with the local wildlife, they're fighting like it." The drone feeds began showing scenes that challenged everything Krath thought he knew about human military capabilities. Human soldiers were moving through terrain that should have required specialized equipment, using nothing but their natural agility. They were navigating cliff faces and dense forest with the same ease as the native predators. More disturbing were their weapons. The humans were using standard Federation energy weapons, but they had been modified in ways that made them significantly more powerful. They were also carrying weapons that Krath didn't recognize at all. Projectile weapons that seemed to be firing solid ammunition at velocities that should have been impossible with portable equipment. But the most unsettling aspect of the human tactics was their apparent disregard for their own safety. They were taking risks that no properly trained soldier should take, charging positions that should have been approached with careful coordination and overwhelming firepower. And somehow, it was working. "Sir," reported his ground commander, "we've lost contact with advance units 3, 7, and 12. Last transmission indicated they were taking heavy casualties from human forces operating in small teams." Krath felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in his command center. "How is a single battalion inflicting heavy casualties on our advance units?" "Sir, I think you need to see the battlefield recordings." The main display switched to a combat feed from one of his surviving units. Krath watched in growing alarm as the recording showed a squad of his soldiers advancing through a forest clearing. The area appeared to be empty, with no signs of human presence. Then the attack began. Humans seemed to materialize out of the landscape itself. They came from above, dropping out of trees with weapons already firing. They came from below, emerging from concealed positions in the ground. They came from all directions simultaneously, moving with a coordination that suggested they had been watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But what truly disturbed Krath was the way they fought. These weren't the measured, careful tactics of Federation military doctrine. These were the hunting strategies of apex predators. The humans moved like they were perfectly at home in this hostile environment, as if the dangerous wildlife and crushing gravity were advantages rather than obstacles. The recording showed one human soldier using a storm bear as mobile cover while engaging multiple Vorthon positions simultaneously. Another human was seen leaping between tree branches while firing what appeared to be some sort of chemical projectile weapon that created clouds of toxic gas. Most disturbing of all, the humans were clearly enjoying themselves. "General," his communications officer reported, "we're intercepting human tactical communications, sir. They're treating this like some sort of training exercise." Krath listened to the translated transmissions with growing disbelief. The humans were using casual, almost playful language while coordinating attacks that were decimating his forces. They were making jokes about the environmental hazards that were hampering his troops. They were comparing the current battle to previous engagements on worlds with names like Death Valley and the Killing Fields. How many worlds like this do they live on? He wondered aloud. His answer came from an unexpected source. Commander Xylak, the Federation officer he had been fighting just hours before, was transmitting on an open channel. "General Krath, this is Commander Xylak of the Federation Defense Force. I believe we should discuss terms for your withdrawal from this system." Krath activated his response channel. "Commander, you are hardly in a position to dictate terms. My forces still outnumber yours significantly. General, with respect, I don't think you understand what you're facing. The humans you're fighting aren't just soldiers. They're soldiers from Earth. Earth is what they call a Class 12 death world. Kepler 442b is only rated as a Class 4. Krath had never heard these classifications before. "Explain." "General, the humans classify worlds based on how dangerous they are to unprotected life. Class 1 worlds are garden worlds with minimal hazards. Class 12 worlds are places where simply breathing the air can kill most species. The humans evolved on a Class 12 world and have spent their entire history adapting to environments that would be considered uninhabitable by most galactic species." The implications began to sink in as Krath considered what this meant. If humans had evolved on a world 12 times more dangerous than Kepler 442b, then this planet wasn't a hostile environment for them at all. It was a mild vacation destination. His thoughts were interrupted by new reports from his ground forces. "Sir, human forces have captured our forward supply depot in Sector 4. They're using our own equipment against us." "How did they get past our security perimeter?" "Sir, they didn't go through the perimeter. They went over it. The humans are using the flying predators as air support. They've somehow trained the Razorbirds to carry them into combat." Krath stared at the tactical display in horror as he watched human soldiers riding the metallic feathered predators like some sort of nightmare cavalry. The birds were swooping down on his positions, dropping human soldiers directly into his defensive lines before ascending back into the air to repeat the process. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "I'm seeing coordinated attacks from multiple species. The humans have turned the entire ecosystem into a military asset." The display showed scenes that defied everything Krath thought he knew about military operations. Storm bears were serving as mobile artillery platforms, carrying human-operated heavy weapons into positions that should have been inaccessible. Smaller predators were being used as reconnaissance units, gathering intelligence on Vorthon positions before melting back into the landscape. But most disturbing of all was the realization that the humans weren't using technology to overcome the challenges of this hostile world. They were using their understanding of the world itself as a weapon. "General," his ground commander transmitted, "requesting permission to withdraw to our landing zones. Our casualties are approaching 40%, and the humans show no signs of slowing their advance. 40% casualties in less than 6 hours against a force 1/4 their size." It was impossible, but the evidence was right there on his tactical displays. "Sir," his communications officer added, "I'm picking up additional signals from the edge of the system. It appears more human ships are approaching." Krath felt his confidence finally beginning to crack. If one battalion of humans could inflict this kind of damage, what would happen when their reinforcements arrived? Commander Xylak's voice came over the communications channel again. General Krath, I'm transmitting data files about human military capabilities. I suggest you review them before making any decisions about continuing this engagement. The files that appeared on Krath's display painted a picture that challenged everything he thought he knew about human military strength. Humans didn't just live on Deathworlds. They sought them out. They turned the most hostile environments in the galaxy into training grounds for their military forces. The soldiers currently destroying his ground forces weren't elite special operations troops. They were standard Earth Defense Force infantry. They had grown up on a world where the weather could kill them, where the wildlife could kill them, where simple mistakes could kill them. They had spent their entire lives adapting to challenges that would overwhelm most galactic species, and now they were applying those skills to warfare. "Sir," his tactical officer reported quietly, "if these files are accurate, then we're not fighting human soldiers on a hostile world. We're fighting apex predators in their natural habitat." Colonel Sarah Chen stood on a ridge overlooking the Vorthon retreat, watching their ships flee toward orbit with the satisfaction of a job well done. Around her, her soldiers were conducting post-battle operations with the casual efficiency that came from years of training in environments that killed the unprepared. The storm bears that had served as their mobile weapons platforms were now helping to collect Vorthon equipment, their massive claws surprisingly gentle when handling delicate electronics. The razorbirds that had provided air support were perched on nearby trees, preening their metallic feathers while keeping watch for any stragglers. "Colonel," reported Sergeant Martinez, her senior non-commissioned officer, "final casualty count is in. 3 wounded, none seriously. The worst injury is Johnson getting bit by one of those spike worms, but the medics say he'll be fine once the swelling goes down." Chen nodded, unsurprised by the low casualty count. Her battalion had trained specifically for operations on Class 4 Deathworlds, and Kepler 442b was actually less hazardous than their usual training environments. The gravity was only twice Earth standard, which felt comfortable after their recent exercises on worlds with 3 times standard gravity. The wildlife, while dangerous, followed predictable behavioral patterns that any Earth-born soldier could read and exploit. "What about the Federation forces?" she asked. Commander Xylak's forces took heavier casualties, but nothing critical. The Vorthans focused most of their attention on us once we made contact. I think we confused them. Chen smiled at that. The Vorthans had made the classic mistake of assuming that human tactics would follow standard galactic military doctrine. They had expected careful, methodical advances with overwhelming firepower support. Instead, they had faced soldiers who treated a Class 4 Deathworld like a comfortable training ground. Her contemplation was interrupted by an incoming transmission from the Federation command post. "Colonel Chen, this is Commander Xylak. I wanted to thank you for your assistance in repelling the Vorthon invasion." "Just doing our job, Commander," Chen replied. "Though I have to admit, your intelligence briefings didn't mention how much fun the local wildlife would be to work with." There was a long pause before Xylak responded. "Colonel, I've been reviewing the after-action reports from my officers. They're having difficulty understanding exactly how your forces achieved such decisive results." Chen looked around at her soldiers, who were now relaxing in the alien landscape as comfortably as if they were on a camping trip back on Earth. Martinez was sharing rations with a young storm bear that had adopted his squad. Lieutenant Park was teaching a group of local predators how to play fetch with pieces of Vorthon equipment. Corporal Williams was examining samples of the local flora with the enthusiasm of a botanist on vacation. "Commander, what exactly is confusing your officers?" "Well, for starters, how did you manage to recruit the local wildlife as military assets? Our xenobiologists have been studying these creatures for years and deemed them too aggressive for any form of domestication." Chen laughed. "Commander, we didn't domesticate them. We just understood them. Storm bears are pack hunters with strong hierarchical structures. Establish yourself as the alpha, show them you're not a threat to their territory, and they'll work with you. The razorbirds are flock animals that respond to leadership displays. Once you prove you belong in their environment, they'll accept you as part of their ecosystem. But how did you know that? Because we deal with similar species on Earth all the time. Bears, wolves, ravens, eagles. The behavioral patterns translate across species pretty easily once you know what to look for. Another pause. Colonel, my tactical officers are also confused by your combat doctrine. You engaged a numerically superior force using tactics that appeared to disregard standard military protocols. Chen considered how to explain this to someone who had never lived on a Deathworld. Commander, standard galactic military protocols are designed for operations in safe, controlled environments. When you grow up on a world that's actively trying to kill you, you learn different approaches to problem solving. Could you elaborate? Sure. Take the attack on the Vorthon supply depot. Your officers probably would have recommended a careful reconnaissance followed by a coordinated assault with heavy weapons support. But we saw it as a hunting problem, not a military problem. You don't hunt dangerous prey by announcing your presence and engaging in a fair fight. You use stealth, you use terrain, and you use the environment itself as a weapon. Chen walked to the edge of the ridge, looking down at the abandoned Vorthon positions. Her soldiers had turned the entire battlefield into a trap, using their understanding of the local ecosystem to channel the enemy into killing zones. Colonel, Xylac continued, I've been reading reports about Earth and other human-colonized worlds. According to our databases, humans routinely live in environments that most species would consider uninhabitable. How is this possible? Because we evolved in those environments, Commander. Earth isn't just our home world. It's a Class 12 death world that's been trying to kill us for millions of years. We survived by becoming better predators than anything else on the planet. She could hear multiple voices in the background of Xylac's transmission, suggesting that his entire command staff was listening to this conversation. Colonel, are you saying that all humans possess these capabilities? To some degree, yes. Obviously, military training enhances our natural abilities. But any human raised on Earth can survive in environments that would kill most galactic species. It's not that we're particularly tough or strong. We're just really good at adapting to hostile conditions. Chen gestured to her soldiers, who were now setting up a temporary camp using materials scavenged from the local environment. Look at my people, Commander. They're not using any special equipment or technology. They're just applying skills they learned growing up on the most dangerous planet in known space. Private Johnson, the soldier who had been bitten by the spike worm, was now using the creature's venom as an antiseptic for his wound while simultaneously training its siblings to hunt Vorthon surveillance drones. It was exactly the kind of improvisation that humans took for granted, but that amazed other species. Colonel, Xylac said quietly, I think I'm beginning to understand why the Galactic Federation was so eager to establish relations with humanity. Oh, this isn't even our best stuff, Chen replied cheerfully. You should see what our Marines can do. She heard what sounded like several pieces of equipment being dropped on the other end of the transmission. Your Marines are more capable than your regular army? Marines specialize in hostile environment operations. My people are Earth Defense Force infantry. We're trained for planetary defense operations in friendly territory. Marines train for assault operations on death worlds that make Earth look like a vacation resort. Chen paused to let that sink in before continuing. And if you really want to see something impressive, you should meet our Special Operations Forces. They train on worlds that are so dangerous we can't even send regular Marines there. The silence from the Federation command post stretched for almost a full minute. Colonel, Xylac finally said, I believe I need to file some very detailed reports about human military capabilities. Feel free to include video footage, Chen offered. though you might want to add a disclaimer that this was a fairly routine operation for us." She looked around at her soldiers, who were now completely integrated into the local ecosystem. They had not only survived in an environment that most species considered barely habitable, they had thrived in it. More importantly, they had done it while maintaining their humanity and their sense of humor. "Commander," Chen continued, "I should mention that Earth Command is planning to establish a permanent training facility on Kepler 442b. We've been looking for a good Class 4 Deathworld to use as a basic training environment." "Basic training?" "Sure. New recruits need to learn how to operate in mildly hazardous conditions before we send them to the really dangerous places." Chen could hear frantic whispering in the background of Xylac's transmission. She was fairly certain she heard someone mention updating the Federation's threat assessment databases. "Colonel, one final question. How many worlds like Earth do humans control?" Chen thought about the dozens of Deathworlds that humanity had colonized, each one serving as a training ground for different types of environmental challenges. There were the ice worlds where humans learned to fight in sub-zero conditions, the desert worlds where they mastered operations in extreme heat, the high-gravity worlds where they developed enhanced physical capabilities, the toxic atmosphere worlds where they perfected sealed environment operations. "Commander, I think that information falls under operational security classifications, but I will say that if you ever need assistance with operations in hostile environments, Earth Command would be happy to discuss partnership opportunities." The transmission ended, and Chen looked around at her soldiers with pride. They had accomplished their mission with minimal casualties, while demonstrating the capabilities that made humanity valuable allies in the Galactic Federation. More importantly, they had done it while having fun and making friends with the local wildlife. Sergeant Martinez approached, carrying a data pad with the final after-action reports. "Colonel, I've got something interesting in the intelligence summary. Apparently, the Vorthons weren't just raiding this colony. They were conducting a test operation to see how well Federation forces could defend human settlements." Chen raised an eyebrow. "A test for whom?" "Unknown, but the implication is that someone wanted to assess human defensive capabilities before planning larger operations." Chen considered this information while watching her soldiers pack up their equipment. The Storm Bears were helping to carry heavy loads while the Razor Birds were providing aerial reconnaissance for the return journey to the spaceport. "Martinez, send a message to Earth Command. Tell them that if someone wants to test human military capabilities, we're happy to provide more comprehensive demonstrations." "Yes, ma'am. Any particular message you want to include?" Chen smiled as she watched Private Johnson teaching a group of local predators how to play catch with pieces of Vorthan armor. "Tell them that Kepler 442b sends its regards, and that the next time someone wants to threaten a human colony, they should probably bring more than 4,000 soldiers." As her battalion began the journey back to the colony, Chen reflected on the day's events. The Vorthans had come looking for an easy victory over what they assumed would be a poorly defended mining settlement. Instead, they had encountered soldiers from a species that turned Deathworlds into homeworlds and predators into pets. The galaxy was about to learn what humans had always known. There was no such thing as a hostile environment, only insufficient adaptation. And humanity had spent millions of years perfecting the art of adaptation. In the distance, the storm clouds were gathering for another of Kepler 442b's legendary electrical storms. Chen's soldiers quickened their pace, eager to reach shelter before the lightning began. Not because they were afraid of the storm, but because they wanted to get back in time to watch it. After all, there were few things more beautiful than a good storm on a proper Deathworld, especially when it was home, and